Okay, so today I'm going to be assembling a 6.0 Power Stroke, and this is basically going to be by the book. I'm going to show you guys how to. This engine's been overhauled. Um, it's been uh, honed and bored to 20 over, so it's been machined. It's ready to go. So now I have it here in the shop, and I'm going to basically put it together from scratch. Most machine shops, they won't assemble these engines because there's um, a lot of tools needed. Um, and to be honest with you, I don't know why they're not doing it. You figure there's over 1 million of these trucks on the road, so why machine shops aren't building these engines, I have no idea. So it's a pretty simple engine. It's pretty straightforward. Um, so if you built engines before, it should be a breeze for you. It's got a lot of play on tolerances, so it's not too bad. So you got a lot of room to work with, but I'm going to go ahead and show you what I've done and how to get started here. Tolerances and specs basically by the book. So this is going to be as close as it gets for you guys. And I'm also going to go over the connecting rods and stuff like that. So I guess first let's go ahead and go over the connecting rods, and I'm going to show you the bad parts about the Ford connecting rods and get you into specs on those really quick. Alright, so let's go over the connecting rods really quick. So this is a brand new piston pin. I have a brand new rod. When you order rods from the Ford dealer, first off, these are called fractured rods. The reason why they're called fractured rods is because when they go together, when they manufacture these, they basically stick them in a machine, and it just whacks this off, and it just basically breaks these. So only this cap will go to this connecting rod, and the way that you can tell which cap goes to, like if you take your engine apart and you got all your rods everywhere, and you got all your end caps all mixed up, and you don't know which way it goes. If you look at the side of your connecting rod here, it gives you these numbers, so you can match the numbers up to your cap. And they only go on one way. You can't turn them around and put them on the other way because they won't line up correctly. So these rods are kind of a pain in the ass to basically redo and rework them, because they have a taper at the top, and the bushings, if they're worn out, these are really hard to have someone rework them and get them basically remanufactured. The distance between the center of this hole and the center of this hole is super critical. So a lot of shops, connecting rod places, probably will tell you just to go buy a new one. And actually, it isn't too bad to buy a new connecting rod from Ford. They're only about $100, and they come with when you do order a new connecting rod from Ford, they come with the connecting rod bearings too, so you don't have to order separate bearings. They come with brand new bushings already installed, ready to go. So you know what you're going to get. So let's go over this really quick. The procedure for cleaning these up, you basically want to take them apart. I put them in a hot tank and clean them, and then I take the bearings out and then make sure this is all nice and clean. Use some solvent. Don't use Scotch-Brite or anything. You don't want to scar it up. Just use a good solvent and a rag and get everything cleaned up nice and easy. You can tell if I put this pin in here, you can tell how it just will fall out real easy. Okay, now it has a little bit of play to it too. I don't know if you can hear that. Okay, so this, even though this is a brand new pin, this is worn out. So if this is worn out, according to Ford instructions, rod's garbage. If it's not worn out, then you go down to number 2. You get this nice and clean, put your cap on, and you want to torque these to first you got to torque these bolts down to 33 foot-pounds. So you stick it in a vise and get it nice and firm. Tighten these bolts to 33 foot-pounds. Then you're going to tighten them up to, I believe it's 50 foot-pounds. So you're going to torque these down to 50 foot-pounds. Once you have this nice and torqued, no bearings in it, then you're going to take a bore gauge and you're going to measure the inside of this diameter here. The specs for this bushing, okay, is 1.3391 to 1.3394. If it's anywhere out of that tolerance, it's garbage. Now the specs for the mains, the connecting rods here, if this is this spec you want to be 2.8735 to 2.8745. If it's out of those specs, it's garbage as well. So you're pretty much screwed on these connecting rods, and if they're worn out like this one is, you can see the scarring on the inside of these bushings and the scarring on the connecting rod here at the cap. If it's worn out, it's garbage, and usually these wear out due to bad oil changes, bad maintenance, getting too hot. There's a couple of different reasons why these will wear out, but let me show you what this would look like here. So this is a brand new connecting rod, brand new main bearing, and when you get it from Ford, these are pretty much nice and tight, so the caps don't go anywhere, or the bearings won't go anywhere. But we're gonna go ahead and slide this through here, and it should fall on its own weight. Okay. If it was nice and clean. Let's go ahead and squirt this down a little bit. If you have any oil on it, okay, you should see it fall on its own weight. Okay, that's a nice snug fit. Now if you add oil to it, okay, put some oil on there. See what happens here. Okay. Usually on connecting rods that are used, if the pin falls on its own weight, and then you put oil on it, and it stops. See how it looks on the used rod here? Maybe a little difference. This one, it just fell right through. See how it's still falling right through with oil on it? So that's too loose, and I've measured this with a bore gauge, and I know it's out of spec. So this thing is like this measured like 3397 or something like that. So I know it's pretty out of tolerance there. So anyways, that's how you measure up your rods and check them to see if they're reusable. So next we're going to go into the engine side, and I'm going to show you the main bearings and how to measure the main bearings to the crank. Alright, so now let's look at the main bearings. So on this engine I put the main bearings in. I have the cam installed already because the cam just slides right in. So I did new bearings on the cam, and the cam is nice and smooth. There's no drag in it. The main bearings I have installed, and then I installed these bolts are reusable. They're not torque to yield. So if you want, you can put ARP studs on here. Otherwise, you can just reuse the Ford bolts that were already there. So first, we're gonna put the bed plate on after we get the bearings installed, and we're gonna torque the bed plate down. There's two ways to do this. I'm gonna show you the way that I'm doing it today, and I'm gonna show you a different way you can do it if you don't have the tools to do. If you want to do a cheaper route. So let's start with this way. What you do is you put all your main bearings in, and you get your bed plate torqued down. Okay, you torque it to these specs. So you're first going to tighten it. There is a pattern for it as well. Okay, there's the pattern, the torque pattern. But first you're going to torque it down to 90 foot-pounds. Then you're going to go to 120, and then you're going to go to 170. Okay, so once you get it torqued up, we're going to measure your crank. So you measure your crank here, in there, in here, and on the back. Okay, so this is going to be on the engine facing that direction anyway. So we're going to measure these up and write it down, and then we're going to take a bore gauge and we're going to go inside of here and we're going to measure this with a bore gauge. And the bore gauge will go all the way through the motor. So I have a pretty long one, and I'll show you how we do it with a bore gauge here in a minute. So you take a bore gauge and you measure out all your mains with this torque down. Now your tolerances, okay, you want to be let me give you your specs here. On your mains, your tolerance is 0.0008 to 0.0034. Okay. So that's the mains for the 6-liter. Okay, so now the second way to do this, in a cheaper route to go, if you don't want to order a bore gauge and have all these specialty measuring tools, is to use plastic gauge. Now, what you do is you have your bed plate off, you put your main bearings in, and then I use the alignment tool on this motor. You can see it's mounted right here on the back, and this will line up the crankshaft to the cam perfectly, and that's very critical. It stops the crank from moving too, so you don't want the crank to move at all. So so there's two reasons why they use this tool. One is to line up your top dead center for your cam and crank alignment, because that's very, very critical. And if you're off by one tooth, this engine will not start. The second thing is, when you're measuring your main bearings using a plastic gauge, the crank and the cam will spin freely if you don't have this here. So what you're going to do is you pull the bed plate off, put your bearings in, you set your crank in, and then you put your plastic gauge. And what this is it's like a little plastic stuff that gets squished. So on this thing here, this sheet, it shows you, it starts out at 1 thou. That's millimeter. Let's go to inches. How's that? Okay, so this is 1 thou to 3 thou. So basically, when you squish this plastic between the main bearings and the crank, it'll give you your clearances. So you put your crank in, you torque the bed plate down, and then you're going to loosen the bed plate up, and then you're going to remove the bed plate, and then you measure the plastic gauge on the crank. So you can go in with wherever it's at, and you can just get next to it, and you line up the slots here and measure out how much it's squished down. So it'll tell you 1 thou, 1.5, 2, or 3. So obviously you want to be at like 3, less than 3/4. So you want to be around 3 thou or better. So if you're under 3 thou, If you're in between 1 and 3, anywhere in between here, you know you're gold. So once you do that, then we go ahead and get the O-rings for the bed plate installed, and then put some silicone on those, and then get the bed plate torqued down, and then you're good for the crank. So that's done. Get all your bolts installed, get it all torqued down, and you know your tolerances are great. If they're not good, then you need to do some machining or figure out bearing options. So now, we'll get. I'm gonna go ahead and use a bore gauge, measure this out really quick, and measure out the cranks. I got 3 different cranks down there, so I can basically pick and choose which one I want to use. Whichever one's closer, whichever one's tighter, it's probably the one I'm going to go with. And once I get that done, I'll move on and show you how to install your pistons, connecting rods, and how to measure your connecting rod clearances. You can do, for your connecting rod clearances, you can do the same thing for the with the plastic gauge, or before you put it in, you can measure out the crankshaft with a you can measure out the crank, and then I can do a bore gauge on the connecting rods and see what those are at. So so pretty much I'm gonna go ahead and get started and show you how to do the bore gauge, and then how to install pretty much everything on this motor. So I'm gonna go top to bottom. This is probably gonna be a little bit lengthy video, but I'm gonna try to cover as much as possible and give you as much information as possible so that you guys don't screw anything up. And I want you guys to give me a good review, because it's a lot of work, and it's really hard to shoot a video and build a motor and try to teach you guys how to do this at the same time. This motor is actually for a customer, so it slows me down a little bit on my work, but at the same time I'm trying to help you guys out for doing this in your own garage or whatever. So if you got a machinist that will bore and hone your blocks out, then you can do this all in your own shop or in your garage and pretty much build an engine. It's not hard, it's very simple. So I'm just going to walk you step by step through it, and just do as I do, and you guys will be great. Alright, let's get started. So I got my assistant Kelly here, my machinist. What we're doing is we're miking out the crankshaft right now. And we're going to measure out and write all the numbers down, and then we're going to check with the bore gauge.
Zero that out.
Okay. So now we use the line bore.
1.3.
Okay.
1.4.
Okay, so the main bearing clearance, we got 0015, 0016, 0015, 0013. They're pretty much all pretty close to each other along the whole main bed plate here. So I'm within tolerances on the mains, so that's good. That means the crank's ready to go. So now we're going to do the measurements on the rod bearings here. So make sure that you have these torqued up to 50 foot-pounds, and then we measure out the crank and make sure that these are all within spec. I'll give you the tolerance is pretty much the same On the connecting rods here, I'll give you the specs for these. So on the connecting rods, it's 0.0008 to 0.0033, so it's pretty close to what the main bearing clearance is for the crankshaft. So we're going to go ahead and mic up all these connecting rods with the bearings in them, make sure they're torqued down, and we'll get it set up for the engine. And then so once we know that all the specs are correct on the cranks, then we're going to go ahead and put the crank in, and then we'll put the rods and pistons in. Okay, so we used the line bore, or the bore gauge, and measured out the main bearings, and we also torqued down the on the bench. We torqued up the connecting rods and measured every connecting rod to make sure that everything's within clearance specs for the crankshaft. The farthest I got, so everything as far as my main goes, my lowest was 0.0013. My high point was 0.0016. So I'm very well within specs here. The connecting rods, I think the lowest I had was 0.0018, and the highest was like a 2.6, I think 2.3. So I'm still within specs, so everything looks good. Now what we're gonna go ahead and do is unbolt the bed plate here, get the crank set in, and then we'll continue putting the engine together. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and take our specialty tool again. So this has two locating dowels here. I don't know if I explained that to you earlier. And what it does is it locates right here on the camshaft. And what this does is it locks in, and basically you take a bolt and go right into the threads here. Okay. Go ahead and lock this down. I want it to move. And then we'll take our crankshaft. Make sure you oil these bearings up a little bit. Make sure everything's nice and clean here on the bed plate. I'm going to go ahead and blow this out and make sure everything's cleaned up. Use some brake cleaner. And I'm going to oil up these bearings. Got a little oil right here. So I'm going to oil these up. And make sure you get a little bit of oil in your galley here. This will help it with the dry start. Even though the oil pump is pretty sufficient on the 6.0s, I still like to have these things oiled up pretty well. Okay. Another thing I forgot to mention is I already have the jets installed. I installed the camshaft. Basically, it's just two bolts on the end of the camshaft here. This has I have new bearings all installed in this, and I did the same thing. I used a bore gauge and I measured out the camshaft bearings to the camshaft to make sure that they're within spec. I installed the jets in here, and the jets, you want to make sure that you Loctite these bolts in. They don't require much torque. I think it's only like 10 foot-pounds of torque on the bolts, but I use Loctite on those. I want to make sure that those don't come loose. So next, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to take the crankshaft and slide it on the top of the engine here. Okay, so There's a couple different reasons why they use this tool. One, if you're doing a plastic gauge setup and putting the bed plate on here, you don't want this crank to move at all. It's very critical that this stays put. So that's one reason what this is here for. The second reason is to line up your camshaft and your crankshaft gears, so that way you're at top dead center on both of them. So it's very critical that this gets set perfectly in the correct gear, or else your engine will not start. So you'll have big time engine damage if that occurs. So anyways, we're gonna go ahead and put the bed plate on. When you do the O-ring for the bed plate, start from the outside. There's two little locating areas on the bed plate, and you want to use a little bit of silicone on these. I put silicone at the end, and so you can see that there's these little locators here. There's one on each end. So I put a little bit of RTV on there, and I put some RTV here on the corners. So basically all four corners, it's going to have a little bit of I just use some just black RTV gasket maker, and make sure it's nice and clean. Some RTV on here on all four corners. Get your bed plate put on, and let's get it bolted down and torqued up. Okay, so we got the bed plate on here. It's not torqued down yet. It's just all I did was oil up the journals a little bit for the cam bearing or the crank bearings, so they're nice and oiled up, and put a little bit of RTV here, and right here, a little gasket maker. So this is going to seal nice and good. You don't want a bed plate to leak. Next, we're going to go ahead and I use ARP fastener assembly lube, and you're just going to put some on these threads. You can use oil as well. I just like using the fastener stuff. It's a little nicer. So I'm gonna brush these all down with ARP grease, and then get these torqued down. Okay, so now we got this bed plate on here and torqued on. I'm gonna go ahead and put the other bolts on. First, you want to torque. There's a torque pattern for this, so make sure you follow the torque pattern. You want to torque it to 120, and then go to 170, and then 190. I think is the last one. So these aren't torqued to yield, so that's why they are reusable. So you torque them down to a specific torque spec, and that's it. So let's go ahead and, now that we got everything on, go ahead and pull this off. Be able to rotate the crank by hand pretty easy, nice and smooth, no bind anywhere. Okay, so now that we got that done, we'll go ahead and I'm going to rotate it to the side. And I'll start with one side of the pistons, and then I'll rotate it to the other side and do the other side. I'm just going to get them put in, and I'm not going to torque them down. I'm just going to get them nice and snug, so we can torque. As soon as I get the pistons put in, I can torque them all down together. Alright, I'm going to kind of have you watch over my shoulder here and show you how I do this. So, what I did is I cleaned up the cylinder, make sure it's nice and clean in there, and then I put some oil in there. You want to make sure that your orientation on the on your piston is correct with the the way it's going out. So make sure that your jet is in the right spot. So if your piston goes down, if this notch isn't in the right position in the bore, it'll hit the jet. So there's an arrow on these pistons. This arrow particularly points up towards the top of the motor, and that's how every one of them is. So that's how you know that you got your jet notch on the right side. Make sure your connecting rod is connected correctly. You want it to go in the motor correctly, or else you're gonna have a hard time getting it to line up with your crankshaft. So what we're gonna do, take a little bit of oil, and I just oil up the skirt here, both sides. Okay. When you put the connecting rod down there, make sure it clears that jet. Okay. Now on the top rings, you have your bottom ring, your middle ring, and your top ring. So the top ring, you want to put that right at 12 o'clock. The middle ring, you want to put that about 7 o'clock. You don't want those to be in line with each other. Now I use this here. This comes with an Allen wrench. I prefer to use a ratchet wrench, quarter drive, and you just push it on the block here. Let it compress that spring in. Okay, and try to hold it against the block as much as possible. You don't really want this to move. Then you just take your mallet here, and you're just going to tap. It doesn't have to be really hard. Okay, just like that. Okay, so I just use the wood part. It doesn't mark up the piston at all, and nice clean installation. And I'm not banging on this really hard. You just want to do light taps. If you bang on it really hard and a ring gets caught up on this, especially the oil ring, if that gets caught up and breaks, you're going to be in a world of trouble. So just do light taps, and now we can go ahead and just kind of tap this in a little bit. Now you should be able to just push it in by hand. Now you have your main cap here, your connecting rod cap. Make sure that your bearings are lubed up with oil. Okay. Put a little bit of oil on these. You can't really go wrong with putting too much. It doesn't really matter. And then I'll go around to the other side and I'll show you how to connect these up. Okay, so on the end of I take the bolts from the flywheel and I just put 2 in here to make it so I can turn the crank easier. So what I do is I use a mallet and I spin the crank out until this part's going to be all the way out towards me here. Okay. Now you should be able to push this in by hand. So the piston just slides right down. Okay, goes right there. Now make sure you get your fractured rod in correctly. So the numbers usually go on the other side. So if this is the arch that goes up, your numbers on your rods will go up the other direction. So the numbers are going to go on the back side here. And put just a little bit of oil on the crankshaft here. Make sure it's nice and lubed up for us. Okay. And then you just go ahead and tighten this down. Okay, so now that that is all done, should be able to move. What I'll actually do is put a little bit of oil in every cylinder here, just so we have some lubrication. And then you should be able to spin this by hand, nice and easy. Okay, there's no binding, everything's moving nice and smooth. Shouldn't take a lot of force. Should be able to do it one-handedly. Okay, so that's all nice and clean. And now we'll flip the engine up on bottom end up and continue with torquing the main bolts. And I'm going to show you how to, we're going to make sure that the clearance between the rods are good. Okay, so now that we got the engine up here, I can measure, you want to measure the distance between your connecting rods. Okay, so what I have is just a feeler gauge. I got one that's at 15 and one that's at 24. Factory specs is 12 to 24 thou. So if you can get a 15 thou gauge in there, you're good. If 24 doesn't fit, you're still good. Okay, so this one, I can get a 15 in there. That one, I can get a 15 in there. This one here, I can get a 15. Let's see if I can get my 24 in that one. Nope. Okay, so I know that I have good clearance between my connecting rods. So that is done. So next, we'll go ahead and torque up the connecting rods, and I'll give you the torque specs for that. Okay, so first we'll go ahead and torque these up to 33 foot-pounds, and then I like to do them a little evenly. Okay. And so we'll just go to 33 foot-pounds, and then we'll go to 50 foot-pounds. So once you get that all torqued down, then we can go ahead and assemble the rest of the bottom of the motor. Alright, so we're ready to put the rest of the bottom end together. I wanted to point something out to you. If you were going to order a long block from Ford, this is pretty much about what you're going to get, except it's going to, or a short block, should I say. If you order a short block from Ford, this is what you're going to get, and the only other thing that you're going to have in it, you won't have any sensors. You're not going to have your heater, block heater. There will be no crank, no cam sensors, but there will be lifters in it, and you will not have high pressure branch tube in here either. So all the lifters will be installed, and they give you a little plate that they bolt right here. Okay, so this plate is for shipping purposes, so that it doesn't damage that front gear there. But they put that plate on there, and this is just about all you're going to get. So you're not going to have a rear engine cover, front engine cover, or anything else. So I just wanted to point that out to you, so you guys know if you ever need to get a motor, a short block from Ford, what you're going to get, so you know firsthand. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and continue putting this together, and we'll just go step by step here. And first we're going to start with the upper oil pan.